Hello and welcome to Roll for Topic, a roundtable discussion about topics related to running role-playing games. I'm Chris Salzman.
And I'm Andy Rao.
Andy, welcome to episode 2 of season 2.
Yes. I know everyone has probably watched the trailer, or like the teaser, the trailer for the trailer, I think is the style now.
Yeah, everybody's waiting for season 2 to wrap up so they can binge it in one long weekend. Although I would encourage you not to do that. If you did that with our season 1, you would be, I think you'd die by the time you got through that session. Yeah, so we are going to continue with doing what we're doing in season 2, which is rather than rolling on a table of topics, we're rolling on a table of design challenges instead. So it's a subtle difference, but it's quite fun. I think I'm going to roll on that pretty shortly, but I just want to check in about one thing. So earlier today, we were talking about, I've been getting a hankering to read the Silmarillion, and I wanted to get your on-air thoughts about that. So like, am I correct that you rank that higher than Lord of the Rings? Or like, what's your favorite of the Tolkien?
I don't know if I would rank it higher than Lord of the Rings. It's a really different work than Lord of the Rings. Structurally, it's a different book. You know, Tolkien didn't write it as a novel. But as far as the enjoyment I get out of reading it, yeah, it's right up there with Lord of the Rings. I mean, how do you say something's better than Lord of the Rings?
Right, yeah.
But the Silmarillion is challenging in different ways than the Lord of the Rings is. It's more challenging to read, but it's very rewarding. It's very rewarding.
Yeah, that's the sense that I got, because I've tried a run at it 2 or 3 times in the past. You know, I've gotten like 10, 15 pages in and been like, oh, this is good, but this is going to be, I need to sit down and read it. And so the thing that you mentioned to me recently was to just like, if you're like getting bogged down, to skip to like, I think like the third part. Yeah. That's where like the really great stuff is.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly how many parts there are in it. I think it's like a half dozen or so, but you know, it's really a collection of discrete things. You don't really need to read them in order. And actually the parts that you start out with, I think, while really interesting and rewarding to dig into, are not especially compelling. You know, especially compelling to read. It starts out with the creation of the world, and as I was mentioning in our discussion earlier, people compare it to like the experience of reading the Bible, right? Which we all have kind of different, I think, stereotype ideas in our head of what it's like to read the Bible, but there is that when you start reading it and it starts with the creation of the world, there is that like, oh boy, it feels like I'm starting to read like the Old Testament from the beginning straight through. So my encouragement is that if you find yourself just getting a little bogged down in the opening 2 sections, I think the first section is about the creation of the world, and it has a really beautiful set of imagery about the creation of the world. It's really beautiful. And then the second section is kind of describing the Valar, the god type beings in the setting. That's there for the super nerds, I think. So come back to that stuff. Unless on your first try through, you're like, this is great. And skip to the third part, because that's really where the story of that's where the story of the Silmarils is, and that's the meat of the Silmarillion. So I don't really know. I mean, I guess I understand why they would on editing it, they would choose to put that creation stuff at the beginning, because I mean, I guess it chronologically happens first. Yeah. But it's really not. It's not where the main course of the book is, and so I think it's a questionable decision. I think some of that stuff might have worked better putting it in appendix at the end. Yeah,
well, okay, well, I guess we don't need to dissect like the publishing history of Tolkien at this point, but yeah, I mean that sounds great, and it does sort of make me wonder like if you could even structure, right, because it's, you know, we talk about tabletop games here, like structure a tabletop campaign in that way too, where you did some sort of creation myth for your world. And then skip forward, did something other that's, some other metaphysical sort of thing, and then got into your campaign proper, if that would be a fun way to approach.
Yeah, well, I've thought about it a lot in a kind of an RPG context, because one thing that's really interesting when you're reading the story of the Silmarils and then you read the Lord of the Rings is the difference in the type of story that they're telling. Oh. And that's always just really intrigued me. I can think of few better literary incarnations of this idea of a golden mythic age where everything was cranked to 11. You know, the Lord of the Rings is already soaked through with this idea that the greatness of the world is bleeding out. and the best days are past. And as you read the Silmarillion, you're reading about, kind of this world, not at its peak, but back close to its peak times. And so you see the greatness that was lost. And I think read as a package alongside Lord of the Rings, I think it's a kind of moving literary experience. And just to pull it back down into like gamey terms, so many settings have that idea of like in the past, you're exploring the ruins of this civilization that like clearly was pretty awesome, right? These epic dungeons, these massive ruined fortresses, these dwarven mines. There's always a suggestion that when these things were in their prime, they were amazing and wondrous, and you're digging through the rubble. And that's cool, but I have often wondered, why don't we play fantasy games in that like mythic time period where everything's cranked to 11 and everything is at its peak of coolness? Why are so many of our games playing in the dusty wreckage of those golden ages?
Do you want the real answer to that is it's a reflection upon the society in which we live in now. That's why we're
I suppose so. That got depressing now. So this was a roll for topic, everyone. Cool.
Yeah, there you go. No, you have now like completely sold me on. I need to make it through the Silmarillion as quickly as possible because it sounds really great. I'm such a sucker for Lord of the Rings. It just seems like this is a natural next step. And then come back to me in a month and I'll be like buried deep in Christopher Tolkien's notes. Going back through all those volumes.
People talk about the Silmarillion being, this sort of hardcore reading experience. And it's more challenging than Lord of the Rings. But man, it's like a 3 out of 10 on the like Tolkien rabbit trails you can go down.
Yeah, right.
Christopher Tolkien collected and edited a lot of Tolkien material you can read that if you want to go way down the rabbit hole, like way farther than the Silmarillion. So
yeah,
I don't know.
Okay. All right.
I hope that you'll report back with your progress, and I also hope if you bounce off it, I think that would be interesting to talk about too. So I hope that you don't feel sheepish if you dig in, and
Oh no, if there's anything this podcast has proven, it's that I'm really good at talking about great ideas and never following through on them. So that's that is okay. Yeah. I think we have a copy on the shelf. It's been on the shelf for 15 or 20 years at this point, right? So I think this is time to pull it down. All right. Well, let's go ahead and roll on our table at this point, and then maybe we can think about the Silmarillion even more as we're designing our challenge here. All right. Do you have it pulled up?
I do have the table right in front of me. So Chris, if you can brandish a D10 and give me a roll, let's find out what we're going to talk about today.
All right. 4.
A 4. Oh, today we will be designing on the air useless magical items that might actually have uses. So let's start. Let's put some. Let's define this assignment a little bit more so that we know what we're up to. Let's design. So let's design a couple of these things, but not too many. So should we create 3 of these things?
Yeah, let's aim for that and see how it goes. I think there's you could do 100 of these. Not easily, but we could do 100 of them. Let's try to stick to 3. And I think the boundary that I want to raise right away is that word useless. To me, that means this is not like a wand that casts fireball, right?
Yeah.
This is, it's got to be something that might not have been intended for the purpose that it ends up getting used for.
I have the same thought about it too. I was thinking that these would be magic items where it would never be immediately clear from their main purpose how you would ever use these. But let's start, Chris, by talking about when these things have cropped up in your games, if at all. So tell me about a useless magical item that ended up having uses.
Yeah, the one that comes to mind immediately, I don't know if it really had a use, but the Cloak of Billowing, which I think was added in 5e in Xanathar's Guide or something. Yeah, so it's this cloak that when you snap, the cloak billows out behind you in a very dramatic fashion, and then when you snap again, it stops billowing, and that's it. That's all it does, right? So it's a very useless magical item in that it all it does is make you look cooler. But what I found is when you present that in the game, there's a certain sort of player who must have it, at all costs. they must have it. And for them, it ends up having a lot of uses to make things more dramatic. And I think I've even given it some mechanical advantage here and there. It's like, well, I mean, if you walk in with that cloak billowing, that's going to, allow your deception check or your intimidation check to go a little bit better.
Yeah.
So like that's the one that comes to mind. I think I've also had a mug that, turns everything into alcohol. Those sorts of like trinkets that I think allow players to grab onto them and do stuff that's like somewhat interesting for their characters. And then, whether or not it ends up having a use in game to solve a problem, it's sort of like, well, yeah, that'd be great if it can. But for me, it's more fun if they can use it to, flesh out who their character is.
Yeah, that's a good point. Some of these, it's fun when they find these and they find a way to use them to accomplish something. But like you say, there's value in items that really just provide some flavor to the character or to the setting. One that's cropped up in my games, I hesitate to say this is useless, but this falls into the category of magical items that would realistically be created and used in a fantasy setting that just don't have a real obvious adventuring application. And that is a wand that controlled the weather, but not in a dramatic lightning bolt type of way, just a wand that could slightly mellow out the weather, do modest changes, the type you would need to do if you were doing agriculture or something in a fantasy world and you just needed to maintain some stable, inoffensive weather for a while.
Oh, okay. So not like Earthsea level wizardry over.
Yeah, not
over
like,
weather.
Bring a tsunami down or start a lightning storm, to hit your enemies in combat.
Yeah, it's like, as you were saying that, it's almost a fun, useless magical item would be the equivalent of an umbrella. Right?
Yeah.
It's like some sort of wand you hold up and it just repels water that's coming down.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of fun technological solutions that we have in modern day that I think you can kind of make into magical items.
Yeah.
That way. I mean, I think it'd be fun to drop something that's the equivalent of a calculator, right? Into your
absolutely,
your fantasy is. Right, because I mean, you think about it, and if you have to do math longhand, and then all of a sudden you have this magical tablet that can show you how numbers add together. That could be a powerful magical item.
If you start thinking about what would people want magic to help them do, you would get this huge list of really mundane things that we have maybe modern technology that does it for us. So, whatever, a spell that just tells you if there's any leaks in your boat or a barrel or something, right? A bunch of little things that I think you would come up with. So how do we want to start this?
I feel like we just fired off a couple of good ideas. They're not quite inventive enough. Let's really give ourselves a constraint here.
Okay.
So when we say useless, the wand that can control weather a little bit, or magical calculator, those seem almost a little bit too useful, right?
Yes.
So let's maybe say this. And I think you actually told me this a while ago about creating magical items. Think about something that the creator of it would consider a mistake, or otherwise something that did not do what they expected it to be.
So what problem were they trying to solve by the creation of this magic item?
Yeah, by the creation of it, but they accidentally created something else out of it. Yeah, so I guess I'm thinking about let's come up with something maybe they were trying to make some sort of wand that could move a boulder. This big boulder. It didn't work for whatever reason, but what it actually does is it attracts all the little pebbles towards it.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Right. So something that the creator of it's well, it didn't fulfill my task. So sure, you can have it, but now you've given the player something that can attract all the pebbles in a 10-foot radius to the player.
One thing that springs to mind is along those lines, what if kind of a classic magic item from Lord of the Rings or something? What if it just didn't come out right? They were setting down to make a sword that glows when orcs are within 100 feet, and it turns out it glows when clay deposits are within 100 feet, right?
What if it glows when it's within 100 feet, right? Something like that. It only glows when it itself is within 100 feet, right? And I think what tickles me about that is you have no idea how that might end up getting used.
Yeah. Let me put some more constraints on us here to help us out. Let us start with a weapon that does something that is useless in the way that we've defined useless. How might you enchant a weapon or create a weapon Like, what would you have it do that would have no combat value, not even any combat value? So it can't glow bright to blind people. It can't, nothing like that.
Yeah. But it also can't take away like what makes it the weapon.
One obvious answer is you're some sort of like ornamental weapon that's not designed to be used. People might put all sorts of silly colors or enchantments on it, if it's if its purpose is to hang on a display case in the Duke's, foyer. But let's imagine something that like you would use and it like functions normally. It's a sword or whatever, but it does something like with zero. It does something weird that has nothing to do with its like combat purpose.
Yeah, I think we're both like sitting here thinking about players who would find a way,
I know.
way to use anything you give them. Like, yeah, okay, so thinking about a sword, this is dumb, but like, like the lightsaber sound that sounds when you swing a lightsaber. Like a fantasy sword that makes some sort of silly sound whenever you move it around, I think would be pretty great. And like maybe it does make it yells out the name of the king or something. It's like, yeah, for the king every time you swing it. It's one of those things where it seems really cool, but it actually ends up being very annoying. So the players find it like in a storeroom in the basement of the castle. Because it's like, oh, geez, we tried to use this once.
Yeah.
And it just was awful.
You know how popular fiction versions of weapons and fighting is not like the real experience? And I'm
I
not
don't personally.
I'm not like
I'll
an expert in any of this. But like as an example, like in movies, you have that thing where people like hold their handguns like side like horizontally or whatever, when you wouldn't do that in a real life situation. So what if the person designing the weapon had no real sense of how it would actually be used, and so they designed it to do something like not harmful, but it's dumb? What if every time it's drawn, every time it's raised, the sword makes like that a loud shing noise, like it's being pulled from a scabbard?
I like that, like a sound effect sword, essentially. It's just like, yeah.
Okay, well, how about we, for the sake of moving on, I like your idea. Like, let's a sound effect weapon. Shall it be a sword? Like what?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think a sword makes sense. Yeah. So like give it a little bit of backstory. So the magician who created it didn't really know much about swords, so they created this thing to like replicate different sounds. Maybe, I mean, like, could you even give it like a flavor to like try to intimidate the enemy in some way, but it just sort of went wrong and it sounds just sort of goofy whenever it gets moved
it's
around.
Like the cheesiest sounding whatever it is. Like it does a fanfare, or like you say, it yells like for
like
the
the Final Fantasy.
Like, okay. So it's a magic sword. It has dumb sound effects for like when it's raised or drawn. When it like strikes another weapon, it does like a dumb, like an exaggerated sound effect of some sort. And when you pull it out for the first time in a fight, it shouts one of a D10 table of like things that you would never actually say in a fight, but that would sound cool if you had never been in a fight. Yeah.
I think it's a D10 table like that, and then you also roll a D20, and on a 1, it sticks with that sound effect forever.
Yes, that's perfect. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Let's call that our first useless magic item down. The sound effect sword.
Okay. Right, that sounds good.
And so let's change types of thing for our next one.
Can I give you? How about I'll give you a location where you'd find this thing. In a kitchen.
In a kitchen. All right. All right. Well, my mind goes to something used for preparing food.
Okay.
Now, with the obvious caveat that, like, we are edging into possible useful territory if this is anything that can be used to, like, detect poison or, like, or create poison.
Yeah.
Things that would be useful in a kitchen are, like, something that would check if you have the proper proportions of, like, you tell it what your recipe is, and it verifies for you if you have the right whatever proportions of ingredients or something, so that you never add too much salt. That's not very exciting, so let's not do that. But like, can you think of something like food preparation related
at the risk of creating something that is useful, like, I mean, like, what if it is a salt cellar that, like, never runs out or something, or like some sort of spice that never runs out, but maybe the quality isn't very good on it. It's like stale oregano or something like that. You can have as much as you want, but it's never fresh.
And it's like still in one of those little containers with the tiny holes. And so you can only ever get out like a tiny, like a tiny teaspoon's worth at a time. Mm-hmm. But it's endlessly full.
Yeah, I like that. And I think you could the flavor on that could be too, like, there's an inscription on it, that like warns you not to try to break it open, otherwise the world will be flooded with oregano, or like it'll break, like the magic itself will break. Right. I think, again, this is giving all sorts of hooks for the players to maybe do something they shouldn't with it. But I think that's part of the fun of these things.
Yeah. I mean, having an endless supply, I mean, it sounds so dumb, but like that doesn't sound like the worst thing to have in your equipment pile, like an endless supply of salt. I don't even know why, but like I feel like it wouldn't even be that hard for people to find reasons to dig that out and use it in an adventure. I mean, for sure. I have nothing specific in mind, but
yeah, well, I mean, I think that's part of the fun of these things too. Is like it pushes you to find reasons to bring it out, right? Like, 'cause I think there's a tendency with magic items that are really cool to just save them up, but I like the idea of having these things that are essentially trinkets, right? They're not exactly designed to do stuff, and then finding a way to challenge yourself to use them. Okay, all right. So let me give you another. Why don't you give me a location?
All right, a location. How about high altitudes?
Ooh, high altitudes. That's interesting. My mind goes to like a hang glider. That can get you
way too useful.
Extremely useful.
Yeah. Single Not use. Only useful, but awesome. So we can't have that.
Yeah, let's see. High altitude. So the stuff that you would want in high altitude is like, like oxygen tanks, climbing gear, access to the eagles from the Lord of the Rings.
Yes. So here's here's a different thing. So here's a possible way something could kind of be hobbled. What if it's a genuinely useful thing, but it's got some sort of like safety mechanism, or it was made for like learners or newbies, and so it has this profoundly irritating process you have to go through before it does the simple thing that it does.
Oh. Yeah. What if like there's it's some sort of like magical like spell that can create clouds, but you have to be at cloud level to use it.
Yeah.
That might be, again, it's like I struggle with the usefulness question here. But like, yeah, so it's like you almost have to be where the clouds are already in order to make them, but you can do it once you get up there. So it's a huge process.
What if you could create precipitation, but like only precipitation that could naturally occur in like at the, like elevation and like location that you're at?
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, because it could be. I mean, they use this to like teach school children or something about like the precipitation. What is it, like the water cycle?
Yeah,
right. Like they used it, but right, like so they wanted it to be as accurate as possible, right? Like, yeah, I like that.
And what if in using it like insists that you use the right vocabulary terms for what you're trying to do? So you can't say whatever. You can't say rain. You have to say whatever. I don't know.
Precipitation. Yes, I like that. All right, let me give you one that's sort of like out of left field in that, right? So we've been talking, I think, mostly like fantasy settings and stuff. Yeah. Let's shift to, I'm thinking like a rave. I don't know why.
Okay.
Like modern day. Well, I guess not modern day. Probably like 1990s rave.
Okay, so are we still doing a magic item though?
Yeah, I think it's still a magic item.
Okay.
So like urban fantasy style magic item.
Like we're in the club where all the vampires are listening to bad techno and
like you're the only humans that are in there, and like everybody can kind of smell that you're around. Like, what's the useless magical item that you have that actually gets you out?
Yeah, okay.
Some sort of like scented cologne that allows you to walk in the presence of vampires.
What if it does something to music in its environment?
Ooh. Like amplifies it? Makes it quiet,
like,
changes it.
Those things sound useful. I mean, those things sound a little too useful. What would be something dumb? Like
what if it changes the key of whatever music you're listening to?
Yeah, exactly. What if it makes everything, it shifts it into a minor key or something, or it just transposes it, or whatever the musical term is, a couple of notes in one direction.
Oh, I like that a lot. Your bards would hate it. It uses one trick. Yeah. Okay. So it could change the key, transpose. I guess what would it look like in this setting?
Okay, it's a modern day device. Would it look like an iPod? Or is that too cool?
Like a Walkman?
Yeah, okay.
Maybe, I don't know. Like, maybe it's like a conductor's wand.
Oh,
like a conductor. Yeah.
Yep, that works. Okay, and when you wave it, the speed with which you wave it affects the extent to which the extremes to which the music is moved up or down.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not a musician, so I don't know the right terms, but...
Yeah, I like that. I think it would also, I mean, the caveat that I would put, it always stays musical.
Okay, yeah.
Whatever it's doing as well, right? So it's like it's not like atonal or anything like that.
Yeah, and you can't use it to like, I don't know, do something useful.
Right.
But you could clear a room with like a really off-key, you could clear the dance floor with your off-key tunes.
Yeah, or drive an orchestra absolutely mad.
Yes.
Like, I know we're not playing this, but this is what I'm hearing.
Okay, Chris,
I like that, yeah.
Let's do one more here because we've been chatting for a while. You up for one more?
Yeah. You give me pick a setting.
Okay. All right. How about a swamp?
And so if you were in a swamp,
so here's some things that would be useful.
Yeah.
Locating like dry, like solid ground, or detecting hostile life or edible food.
Yeah.
Those are things that would be useful, so not those.
Yeah. Something you can walk on top. What if like you had a camouflage that, like, what's the opposite of camouflage? Like like the camouflage was like broken in some way where like you're in a swamp, but it gives you camouflage that would be appropriate for like a snowscape.
Oh, I like that.
Or you're in you're in the woods, but it gives you camouflage appropriate for, like, I don't know, being on a target instead.
Yes, that's perfect. So whatever environment is, it'll camouflage you, but in camouflage for the wrong for a different like type biome or whatever. Okay. Yeah. I like that. So then it should be, cloak or something like that.
Yeah, some sort of cloak. Yeah, you put it on, but then to the observer, it makes you... It's not an invisibility cloak, it's a visibility cloak.
Yes.
It's fair. Yeah.
Okay, well, I think that is I think we did 4 or 5, and we could probably go on brainstorming more, but why don't we wrap up while we're ahead? Do you have any kind of closing thoughts on this topic in general?
I do, yes. So this is a really interesting one, because I think, like, the thing that we just were struggling with the whole time was, like, the useless part of it, and just the thought that, like, anything you create can be used in some way. So I almost wonder if it's, like, just an impossibility to try to hit that. The thing that was coming up as we were discussing, to me, that was very interesting, was thinking about, like, okay, you're in this setting or this location, like, what's the opposite of what you'd need in that situation? And if you have a bunch of those things and you lay them out in front of players, like, not in those settings, I think then that's the really interesting part to me. It's like, okay, like, I have a cloud wand that can make clouds. Like, what am I supposed to do with that? Like, we're in a swamp,
I'm reminded, I think that's a great point, and I'm reminded, although the genre isn't fantasy or magical, I'm reminded of the common feature of a lot of post-apocalyptic role-playing games, where there are these big tables of, like, junk you find in the ruins, and it's always stuff like a CD player or, a blender or, a playing card, all this stuff that, divorced of its original context, it's not possible to use it for its original function. You can't plug the CD player and it doesn't work. It doesn't have batteries. But there's a reason this variants of this table are in, like, every post-apocalyptic game I've ever seen. It's fun to give people stuff that, like, that there's just no standard use that it's even possible for it to be put towards. Like, we've been discussing magic items that they have a use. It's maybe a dumb or a frivolous use, but they have a use. But I think there's something to be said also for things that, like, are just... I don't know. I think the camouflage idea, for example, is like an interesting example of something that's almost entirely useless. Like you would almost not want to have that.
Yeah.
But it's still interesting, and you know players will find a way to use it in the same way that they'll find some way to use the broken CD player, even though there's no electricity, you know, there's no batteries and no music, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, you don't have a copy of Metallica's Black Album anywhere. So like, why would you?
That's right.
Why would you even need the CD player?
Yeah, and like, why are you even going on living? Because man.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's wrap up that. Let's wrap up the discussion with that. But you know, if you're listening and you have had a great useless item or magic item or spell or something like that crop up in your game, and people did something really fun and unexpected with it, I would love to hear about that.
Oh yeah, Chris for sure. Yeah, I'd absolutely love to hear. Yeah, reach out, and then if you think of any of these after listening to the episode, please share them as well. I'm sure we'll be thinking about more of them.
Yeah.
Over the next couple of weeks. But yeah, okay, cool. Well, thank you, Andy. This was really fun.
It was, and we have one more thing to cover before we can go. We need to replace this topic. So we used up this topic, and we need to put a new one onto the table of design challenges in its place. And I have one to propose. Yeah,
why don't you go ahead and propose it?
All right. My proposal is to create 3 space anomalies that beg to be investigated.
Oh boy.
And what I have in mind here is, you know, every good sci-fi horror movie, you know, has to start with a ship or a space station that has no good reason to like stop the normal thing they're doing and go do something foolish and dangerous.
Yes.
They have no good reason to divert their course but there's something that's so compelling about whatever it is that they have to. So I'll actually start talking about this topic if I don't stop, but let's throw that on the table.
Yeah, let's put that on the table. I think that's a really good one. I don't know, like we're gonna have to figure out if it makes sense to attach numbers of stuff to this or not. As we do these things. So like let's stick with the 3, and whoever gets to roll it, we'll get to see what we come up with.
Oh, for sure. And we'll figure that out. No problem. As we know, constraints are helpful sometimes, and so I thought attaching a number to it is one good way to do a constraint, but we'll figure it out.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right, so why don't you sign us out, Chris?
Yes. All right. Well, thank you all so much for listening. Yeah, again, if you listen to this and you enjoyed it, please let us know. Especially let us know if you have any thoughts about the design challenges that we're switching over to. I know it's a little bit different from what we were doing before, but again, I think it's a good change. And what we're really hopeful is when we bring on some guests for this, it'll allow them to feel, I think, like a little bit less like they have to be the expert about what we're talking about, and more like they can just sort of participate in a fun design challenge. So I'm really looking forward to that, and hopefully we'll have some guests shortly.
Yeah,
this winter.
And most importantly, Chris wants you to check in with him daily about his progress through the Silmarillion.
Yes, please.
So, especially
if
you see any signs of him flagging, that's when he wants you to really double down and check in. So.
Yeah. I must warn you, though, that if you check in with me, I'm going to make you read a page to me. So, yeah.
All right.
Okay. All right. Well, I've been Chris Salzman.
I have been Andy Rao.
And remember, if your player's having fun, you're a great GM.